Hey, Sam here. As a developer, the thing I love the most is when I get to see people who are experiencing the magic of the apps that we build. Someone who's overjoyed because we built a feature and they were able to get something done in their life. And in order to really drill into that and to be able to achieve that as a front ender, it's really important to think about the user experience you're creating and the user interface, because that is the way that people experience your app. And that is the way that your app communicates itself to the outside world. So in today's lecture, we're gonna, I know that we did a lecture last week on mobile user experience, but we're gonna step back a bit bigger picture, thinking about what is user experience generally, what is user interface design generally, and how could we apply that before we code to make sure that we're setting up our projects for success. All right, so no discussion of UI and UX would be complete without thinking about what exactly they are. So UX is user experience, UI is user interface. The way I like to think about it is that UX is a little bit higher level than UI. So UX is about the usability of the app. It's about how people, what processes the user thinks they're going through to complete their task, like how they think about what they're trying to do, whether the app allows them to actually do that, and who your users are, and all of the research and interviews that goes along with trying to find that out. User interface, on the other hand, is a bit more, it's kind of, if user experience is more in the planning side of things, user interface is more in the coding side of things. But it's obviously not coding, it's coding with pixels. It is visual design type work. It is making the graphics. It's doing the copywriting for all of the buttons and all of the headings. It's the pixels, the shadows. It's creating the brand, the feeling of the application through the visual medium. So that is, obviously this is a very loose definition. You know, in the real world, these don't often map to jobs. Like I know in my company, we have product designers who do both of these responsibilities, but then user experience is quite often something that is a shared responsibility amongst the whole team because, you know, even planning work touches on aspects of user experience. So I think there is a real value as a front ender to having an understanding of these kind of concepts so that even if you don't end up, designing and painting pixels, you have some kind of understanding so that we can help push this along when you're working in a team. So today we're going to focus on the UI UX work that happens before we start coding. How do we make an app idea into an app reality that then we can go and build? So three things we're going to look at. First, we're going to look at from UX, a bit of basic UX about how we can look at a problem from a user's point of view. Then we're going to look at mock-ups as how we can start to move from UX to UI. And then we're going to look at how design systems can save us a lot of time when thinking about UI. Sweet. So why do we make apps? This is a very deep and philosophical question. I mean, obviously there are lots of answers to this question. You know, you could make an app because that's your job. You could make an app because Hayden told you to and that's your assignment. I don't think that's very useful from a user experience perspective because that doesn't tell us a lot. One way to look at why we make apps that does tell us a lot is to think that we make apps to help our users achieve their goals. And that kind of begs two questions. And I think this is very fundamental to understanding if your app is usable and if it has good UX. And those two questions are, who are our users and what are their goals? So we're going to break that down because this is the fundamental thing. Having an understanding of this is a really challenging thing. It's not an answer. It's not a question with a simple answer. You know, it's something you will learn as you build more of an app, as you talk to more users in your market, as you build out your product, as your market evolves. It's something that it's a simplification of reality. It's not that's a fight that we're always having. We're trying to have the best understanding of these things that are very complex because there are billions of people using apps every day. But having a good summary, a good understanding, a good mental model of this will help you make great prioritization decisions, make great user experience and user interface decisions, and just generally ship amazing applications. So first, we're going to dive into the who. Who is using your app? Why is this important to know? Well, I think it's really important to think about who's using your app because different people will have different experiences. Different people have used different other apps. And, you know, when you're building a product, it's a matter of communication. It's a matter of being familiar to them so they understand you, but different enough so that you can actually be an amazing app and achieve their goals. And in order to do that effectively, to decide what hills you want to die on versus what is a distraction, you need to understand where your users are coming from, so that you can build something that's familiar where it should be and different where it shouldn't be familiar. So one example of this is to think about what kind of markets your users are from. So for instance, I was in Singapore recently, and I was using an app called Grab, which is there. It's bigger than Uber in Southeast Asia, whereas Uber is much bigger, obviously, in Five Eyes markets like the US or Australia. And it was really striking. Uber and Grab, like two very similar companies, but obviously very different geographical areas that they target. Totally different kind of homepage on the app. Uber, very minimalist, very simple, very grounded, whereas Grab has this much more busy. It's very obvious all of the features that it has, but it's not as immediately focused on one specific feature. So obviously then these are both terrific apps from amazing teams who put a lot of thought into it, but they've got to very different results because their users that they're targeting are familiar with different things. Another example for this might be the difference between how support would work in like a government service versus a kind of social something app. Young people, if they have a younger market, they might need to offer more like live chat, texting type features, whereas old people might not be as comfortable doing that, and they might prefer to, call over the telephone type things. So having an idea of who your users are demographically really helps there. The other way that you want to try and understand your users is how your users think. Obviously, this is hard. We're not all, we can't all be telepathic, but we can give it a bit of a shot to try and match the user's mental models. And you can tease at this through interviews and research, or just at a basic level, just talking to people and trying to be empathetic with the people in your market. So a mental model is the way that users think about something, the way they think about a task, the way they think about how your system works. One example of mental models that I think is really interesting is the difference in different in graphic design software that targets different markets, how they portray editing. So in Photoshop, which is a market that's much more educated about graphic design compared to a Canva or PowerPoint type software, where they talk a lot about layers. So you have layers, you can have layers within layers, but everything is on a different layer. Whereas in a Canva, I don't think layers is used at all in the user interface because that's not a term that our users have in their mental model. They just think of it as like there's a circle, there's a photo. So it's about catering to how most of your users are thinking, if that's possible. You've got to choose the hills you want to die on. And in this case, teaching users the word layer isn't the most important thing. So we built an application that wasn't about layers. It was about individual shapes and elements and stuff. Another example of this is folders, right? So obviously folders is something that, especially as things move to SaaS models and files are often stored in a database, lots of systems would support having a file in multiple folders. But from a user experience perspective, we might not want to support that because our users have a mental model of how a folder works. They think a folder, a file has to be in a folder. So it would be really confusing to see a file pop up in multiple folders. So it's about not thinking from a technical term, with layers or, the possibility of having files in multiple folders. Like that's a technical thing. You got to throw that out the window, and you've got to, where possible and where it doesn't distract from actually finishing the user's task, you want to match how they're thinking, which is, they think a file can only be in one folder, which is all good, or that, there are elements, not layers, whatever. So that's about the who. We talked about the who, but what about the what? What are their goals, and why is it important to know that? It's really important to think about what their goals are because it helps you make prioritization decisions. Obviously, users can have lots of different goals, but some of those goals are going to be more important than others. Some of those goals are going to be more prevalent than others, and you want to be catering towards the biggest goals, I suppose, in your app to help the most amount of users or the most important users, depending on how you look at it. And a little example of this is Canva versus Google Docs. So obviously both of them have homepages, and on the homepages, they both list new things that you can make and things that you've already made. But because they're different applications targeting different, with different user goals, Canva users are probably making Instagram posts more often. Google Docs users are probably writing essays more often. There's different prioritization of those features. So on Canva, it's much more oriented around creating a new thing because often you could create an Instagram post in one sitting. So you wouldn't want to come back and edit the same Instagram post. Whereas on Google Docs, you probably don't create new documents that often, but there's a lot of editing work that goes into writing an essay, for instance. So they've dedicated a lot more screen real estate towards finding things that you've made in the past with the recent docs part of that. So that's the who and the when. That's really important to have in your head. I think a good way to force yourself to have that in your head is something called user stories. So user stories are like, they're these kind of sentences that go into the format. As a person, I want to do a task so that I can achieve a goal. And this is kind of an alternative to writing requirements. So instead of writing, the application has to show all of the tweets, my application has to show all the train times, you could say, as a regular commuter, I want to see the train times so that I know when to leave the office. That's an example of, again, we're taking something that out of feature language, of like engineering, programming language around, we've got to build the list of train times, and then taking that into user language. And this is really popular with like agile product managers, those type of things. You can go read lots of great Atlassian articles around how you can be agile and write user stories. But I think they're really helpful because they bring back this user empathy, this user language throughout the whole design process. And then what that helps you do is that helps you think from user's perspective, bring in the user perspective when you're prioritizing features, and ultimately think about what's most important at the end of the day, which is making software that your users are going to use and love. So yeah, user stories is something that you can try out in any project that you're doing, even like an assignment, for instance, as a way of breaking up all of the requirements of the project. Instead of thinking in terms of requirements, think in terms of user stories to get thinking in that user mindset. Great. So now we've had a bit of a dive into the UX of our application. We've scoped out who's using it, what they're using it for, and we've got some core user stories around what they expect, the features they expect in the application. Now we're probably, we're moving from this chaotic world of user stories and mockups, and we want to get towards user stories, and user experience, and we want to get towards some more clarity, something that we can go and build, because user stories aren't going to tell us exactly the features to build. We need some mockups. That's really helpful. So why are mockups helpful? I prepared this graphic that I think explains it. You wouldn't write an essay without a plan. Making an app without a mockup is a crime. Yeah, there's that. That's a bit of a meme from back in the days. But I think there is some truth in from that stealing video that you wouldn't go into something without a plan, and for an application, a mockup is often a really important part of a plan to make an application. Mockups are helpful because they're quicker to iterate on, they're quicker to do than programming. And that's really helpful because it helps us get feedback more quickly on the plan. You can take your mockup to a mate just to see if it's totally insane or if it's understandable. You can show it to people in your target demographic to see if they understand it, if your users, if it matches their mental models, if it matches their past experiences, all those things we talked about. With a mock-up, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Your app, when you've coded up your app, it'll be communicating how it works to users. A mock-up lets you test how well your app is going to be communicating how it works to users. So it's a really helpful step in making an app. But obviously there's a wide range of mock-ups. So I'm going to be advocating for a specific type of mock-up today that I think is really helpful for front-end programmers because, obviously there's lots of things that we're not good at as front-end programmers. There's lots of things that front-end programmers generally are probably stronger at coding than they are when you're strong at coding, you might not want to make pixel-perfect mock-ups in Figma because you might be quicker to just write the CSS. But I think that it's really important to understand all the types of mockups so you know that there are some types that even front-enders find useful to do. So there's obviously the scale of the mockup, how much is included in the mockup. So this kind of ranges from doing a mockup of just a single screen of your application, or even smaller than a single screen. You could just do a mockup of a single component, of what does a tweet look like on Twitter, and then moving up to what does the Twitter homepage look like, and then moving up to, this is all on the left, what the whole flow of using Twitter is. So thinking back to a user story, if it's like, as a user, I can write a tweet, it shows me what does the homepage look like, and then it shows me what does it look like when I start typing my tweet? And then it shows me when I press the send button, what does it look like? Showing how the user achieves their task through the mockup. But then, if you think of, there's two axes in this mockups. We have scale on one side, which is how much stuff is covered by the mockup, whether it's a whole flow or just a single screen or component. Then we have the fidelity of the mockup on the other axis. So we have lo-fi mockups like sketches and wireframes. Then we have high fidelity mockups, and these are pixel perfect designs that a professional visual user interface designer might make in Figma. Some people even argue that user stories where you're just writing text are the ultimate lo-fi mockups. I disagree with them because I think that a picture's worth 1,000 words, and a mockup just has that element of being so much more concise than a user story written in text. But everyone to their own opinion, really. So lo-fi, I think lo-fi mockups often, as a front ender, if you're familiar with CSS and HTML, it's often easier to go straight from a lo-fi mockup to building an app than it is to go through a hi-fi mockup. But if you're working on a team with another designer, it might not actually be your responsibility to decide all of the details of how we go from the lo-fi mockup to the hi-fi mockup. So when you're working in a team with a designer, they might create a hi-fi mockup so that then you know exactly what you're going to be implementing. But today we're going to focus on lo-fi mockups because I think that's something that is really helpful. And we're going to look at some tips on how to create lo-fi mockups as a way to plan out your application before you built it, and so that you can test your application by showing it to other people and seeing if they understand it. One exercise that I love in lo-fi mockups, and I think you could do this as in your assignment in any app that you're building, is crazy eights. So how does crazy eights work? 3 steps. You get a piece of paper. I have a piece of paper with me actually. You fold it in half, then you fold it in half again, and then you fold it in half the other way, as you can see on the screen. You shouldn't have folded it. And then on each of the 8 squares that you've now folded into your paper, you get out like a single pencil, single color, nothing fancy, and you just try and mock up 8 ideas on how you solve your problem. Up to 8. If you don't get to 8, that's fine. And then you try and do that as quickly as possible. So here's some example, like on the top, we have someone who's trying to mock up ways to select a photo, and we've got, we can put them in a list, we can put them in a grid, like you're just getting the ideas on paper. So this is kind of basic, this is like visual brainstorming, and it's a really effective way to do it because it forces you to get lots of ideas out. And this is really helpful when you're feeling stuck or when you're in a group and you need to create ideas together, because it lowers your barrier to putting stuff on the page and it gets you into the thinking mindset. Obviously, once you've done that, lo-fi mockup, you might choose one that you think is nice, and you can just continue. Pen on paper, really easy way to make a mockup. Just putting the key details, not putting a lot of effort into making sure that the buttons are perfectly rounded or that the shadows are right, keeping it really lo-fi. It's getting the idea across to yourself and to other people who see it that it's a button, it's an app, but it's not overly obsessed about the details. So Crazy Eights is one way to do that. That's a quite useful consultant type exercise. Another way to do it is to draw on screenshots. Something we love doing at Canva. This is actually my mock-up. I was very proud of it. As you can see, I'm not a graphic designer, but it gets the point across, and that's what's important about a mock-up. I could have written to someone, I think we should put like a box in the templates tab. No, they see this, they know exactly what I'm talking about. Another way you can do it is if you're suggesting a change, which I think a lot of you guys right now are probably working on like greenfield applications, new applications. But if you are suggesting a change, you can just start throwing screenshots together, really. So someone was suggesting that we should change the menu to look like the menu of the app, which is on the very left, to look like the white menu, which is in the middle, and we should have something in the background. So this is literally the person has put 3 screenshots together to portray what their idea is. Screenshots, rectangles, just keep it really simple. It's communicating an idea across, and this is a great tool to get feedback. If you try to explain to me, we'd be 100 words deep in exactly what's happening here. But I can see the screenshot, and if I was familiar with the product here, which I am, I know exactly what they're suggesting. So mockups are a really good technique. Keep it lo-fi, pen on paper, just putting screenshots together in Paint or Canva, all sorts of great applications. And we can use a Crazy Eights exercise if we really need to get the ideas flowing so that we can get some mockups. Then once you get some mockups, you have a better idea. you have a better idea of what you can do with that. Later in the course, in our last UX lecture, we're going to be looking at what we can do with these kind of mockups and a real application, how we can test this with users. But for now, I think it suffices to say just passing them around, just trying to get people's feedback on them is a really good start to making an app more useful. So part 3 today is now that you've got your mockups, you've got a kind of vague idea. Your idea's gotten more concrete, right? So we started off thinking just who's it for, what's their user stories, what are they familiar with, and then we kept that in mind. We made some simple mock-ups of the application. We passed that around. We got some feedback. We, pen and papered. We've rubbed something out with pencil. We've made a really simple mock-up. How do we actually get to implementing that? And when we're implementing that's actually there's so much to learn when it comes to making pixel perfect designs. I'm going to try and teach that for you because I'm the wrong person to teach that to you. Because even like professional graphic user interface designers, it's still a lot to consider for them. No one's considering every button that they make from scratch. No one's thinking, oh my god, what shade of. No one in like an established application is thinking, oh my god, what shade of blue do I need to make this button? That's often not what people are thinking because our users want consistency. It's easier for users if they don't have to think every time, is this a button, is this not? And as a designer, we want efficiency. We don't want to have to every time go and have to reinvent the button. Just like programmers create guidelines, formatters, conventions, libraries, and all kinds of things to make life easier, designers have design systems. So design systems are kind of like they're the library, but for designers, they're really useful. There's so many examples of tons of design systems that are public out there that you can go and read. I've actually included links. You can click all of these, or just click one. Actually, there's a lot there. You've got Material, Fluent from Microsoft, Apple's Hig. You've got some smaller companies like Atlassian or Shopify that have made their design systems public. And then you have internal companies design systems. So like Canva has an internal design system. Unfortunately, it's not public. I'd love to show it to you guys. Every company has a design system, no matter how formal it is. Really, if it's a really small company, the design system is probably in the designer's head. But as companies get bigger and more designers get on board, they write them down so that they can explain, it to other designers. So what's in a design system? Why is a design system going to help you? A design system there's lots of aspects of a design system. They're all a little bit different. A lot of design systems have, as a developer, the first thing you'll see is like a library of components. So Material has, there's like a Material for Android and Material for Web library. We're not going to look at that today. That's going to be our next lecture. Very exciting. We're going to be looking at how we implement and use how we implement a design system. But for now, we're going to look at the bit more high-level stuff about what design systems have for designers. So design systems will often have UI components. They'll have UI component files. So when designers are making pixel-perfect designs of high-fidelity mockups, they'll often use applications like Sketch, Adobe XD, Figma, maybe Illustrator, I don't know, lots of different applications. And these are an UI component library for designers would just be a bunch of like Sketch or Figma files where they can copy paste so that they can reuse buttons. But they'll have specs of the buttons, guidelines around how to use each component, those types of things. They often have just general design and brand guidelines. That's thinking about like what type of colors, fonts, and spacing that the designer should use when making a user interface. And then they'll often have content guidelines about how people should write when they're creating user interfaces, the tone, the grammar, all those types of things. This is really helpful because this covers a lot of questions that you might have when you're trying to create a user interface. You might be asking, what type of message should I write on this button? Should it be done? Should it be done or should it be saved? The design system would help guide you on that. You might be thinking, how much spacing should I put between things? A design system will help guide you on that. You might be thinking, I have this problem and I'm trying to think of like, what are my options in terms of user interface elements that I could put there to help the user achieve this goal. And a design system will provide you user interface elements. So let's go a deep dive. I'm going to be showing examples from different design systems. Often when you're making an application, you probably want to stick to one design system. because if you use different ones, your application won't be consistent, and it might be a bit confusing for users. It'll look aesthetically bad for starters, but it might be confusing for users because there'll be different patterns and different ideas in different parts of the application. So I would recommend you should stick to one design system when you're making an application, but I'll just be showing some examples from different design systems to give you guys an idea of what is in a design system and how that could help you when you're making your user interfaces. So let's look at the first from that list was UI components. Here's material.io. That's Google's design system. We can see there's like tons of UI components listed there. You've got banners, bottom navigation bars, buttons. You can click into any of them. Like so you can go and take a look, and inside of that they'll have the specs of what's the padding on the button. To help create consistency there. But then they'll also often have guidelines for designers, because as a designer, if I'm designing an interface and I want a button with an icon, as we can see on the right, I might be thinking, where should the icon go? Does it go on the left? Does it go on the right? Does it go on the top? Can I put two icons in the button? And those questions are answered in the design system. Someone else has made the decisions. Oftentimes, those decisions are right. It's important to know so that the design system, it's not the law. It's a book of guidelines and recommendations, but it isn't the law. So sometimes you will stray from design systems and you'll want to create your own custom components. I have an interesting story about that. One competitor, I think, is actually a great example of the value of design system components and consistency throughout an application. On the left here, we have this is kind of two ways that the application has to do something. On the left, we have a component that isn't from their design system. It's a custom component for this use case, and it's a rotary dial to change the font. As a user, that feels a bit weird, but it's really important to realize that as a user, that kind of just detracts from my task. If I'm there to change the font, I'm now in stitches because it's quite funny. But as well as being in stitches, I might be a bit confused. But I've invested this mental energy in understanding what this rotary dial is, instead of having mental energy left to invest in actually changing the font. So on the other hand, on the right, if I was to use something that's more common in my design system, or is from my design system component library, I'd create a system that it might not look as cool or interesting, but it lets the user focus on the task rather than having to focus on understanding user interface. And at the end of the day, our users aren't using computers to understand cool, novel user interfaces. They're using computers to get their job done. So, in this instance, I'm not a professional designer, but I would recommend using something like on the right, because it gets out of the way, it's more familiar. And that's kind of the value that a design system provides. It gives you a list of those things that people find familiar, and it lets you apply them in a consistent way across the product, so that your users can focus on their task rather than focus on trying to understand you. So as well as having UI components, which are awesome, there's often more broad and vague guidelines, as we talked about before. On the left, we see some color guidelines from Shopify. So this is looking at their brand color. Obviously, color is one of the examples where you might want to tweak it. You might want to, even if you're reusing an existing design system, you might want to say, I'm going to reuse material design. A lot of these design systems, especially Material or Apple's HIG or Microsoft's Fluent, they encourage people to reuse their design because they want, Google wants all the Android apps to kind of look the same, but they often give you ways out to theme it, and changing the colors is a great one. But it's a good kind of crash course to start from a design system and use that guidance from a professional designer to get some opinions. And professional designers would use this guidance too. Content guidelines are really fun. And they're helpful as well. Obviously, this depends on what you're building. If you're building a website that's very content heavy, having a content and writing guideline is really important. One great example of this is gov.uk, which is the agency that's responsible for all the UK government's websites. They have a set of terrific writing guidelines. If you're looking for some good reading, I'd recommend clicking the link and checking it out. They have a long list of words. They're like, this is how you should use that word. And words are important to the way you interact with the UK government, like their word for Medicare and stuff. But it helps create consistency, and it helps them get the message they want across, and And as someone who's building an application, it's often easy. It's really good to be able to punt those questions of, how do we write? What cases do we use? What's our writing style? Just punt that to a document that's written by some professionals who've done some research about exactly that question of how we design and why we design. So yeah, I suppose that is my that's my whirlwind tour of design systems. So I think in summary today, what we've done is we've done a basic tour of UX, and this is kind of in the order that I think is helpful for you guys to give it a shot. UX, how do we frame the problem? Thinking about who, thinking about why, and then the action item of considering using user stories instead of engineering requirements to frame your tasks. 2, mockups, low-fi mockups as a way to help you plan. Consider using pen and paper, using Crazy Eights, or just drawing on some screenshots to create these mockups really quickly and give yourself a plan before you're making your application. And 3, with user interface. Consider picking up a design system for your project. Instead of having to reinvent the wheel, reinvent the button every time, just reference the design system, and that will let you create a consistent product that your users will understand. That's all from me, but next week we'll be doing a deep dive into design systems, how they get implemented technically, and some tools, real-world open source tools that you can use to do that. So, yeah, good luck. See you around.